Thank you for coming to this boring topic about contracts. How many of you work with Agile methodologies? Most of you. How many of you is working or has worked with fixed price or time and materials contracts? Okay. Don't you think that there is a mismatch between agile methodologies and this kind of contracts? Like they are not balanced, their principles are not really equal. When we talk about contracts, we should first question which are the different point of views from the vendor and the client. The client will usually ask about how the costs are going to be controlled, if there are going to be any kind of budget of the runs, if they are going to review the deliverables in the process at the end, what level of involvement is required from the client. If the scope changes, this will affect directly the quality or the timelines. What happens if it's needed to terminate the contract early? On the other hand, vendors will ask about how the scope is going to be managed. What happens if the priorities change? What are the financial and timing risks that they are going to face? Is going to be any penalty or bonus? What about payments? Are we going to be get paid at the end of the project, during the project? Who is in charge of defining the acceptance criteria? And what is going to be the role of the client on this Agile framework? So in this call, this session is based on three major pillars. The first one is understanding the need for change from the traditional way. Then we will see the benefits of Agile contracts, and then we will see some examples of different Agile contracts that we can implement in our projects. So I'm Jorge Tutor. I'm an IT program manager, growing teams and individuals from 2010. I'm the CEO of MetaDrop, which is a Drupal consultant company based in Spain. I've been in Drupal for more than 15 years and counting. I love it. And you can browse my blog if you would like to see some posts about management and communication and so on. So there is like this conflict, this eternal war between clients and vendors. Clients will push for fixed price contracts. On the other hand, vendors love the time and materials. So they are fighting each other. So we are going to see deeply which are the details of each of them. So a fixed price contract is an agreement where the service provider delivers a project for a predetermined and changeable cost, regardless of the actual time or expenses incurred. So it means like you are signing, like anything that could happen in the project will be on the vendor's shoulders because the client is not going to pay anymore. The client could think that they have budget control or even scope control, but this is real life. You've seen that projects evolve since the beginning, since it was originally documented, and also everything that is not on the first RFP or documented of the contract is going to be an extra cost, which means in the end paying more for the client. So the cost control is a myth. There are, of course, several challenges, like the accuracy of the RFP or the initial documentation. the technical complexity is most of the times underestimated. Of course, the project will see unforeseen events. There will be waste on this kind of project because it was originally written on the contract, you will need to deliver, no matter how, even if no one is going to use it. And because there's a fixed scope, there's no flexibility at all. And of course, there will be tensions. There is no real collaboration on this kind of contract. This is a vendor versus client with exhausting negotiation, penalties, out of the scope, extra cost, change request process, and so on. There is an interest conflict. This is a sum-zero game. I win, you lose. Because either the vendor ends the project early, but the client is overpaying for the product, or either the vendor is overworking, but the client is underpaying for the same product. Of course, there will be tensions on the client side. When? On the RFP creation, because everything that they forget to mention on that specific document is going to be an extra cost. And of course, they need to pressure the vendor so they deliver as much as possible during this contract. On vendor side, they will need to deliver no matter how. So they will find probably some workarounds, shortcuts, in order to get more or any profit. Because sometimes these kind of projects, those fixed price projects, the vendor, they get no income or no benefit at all. We'll see it later on. The client has less incentive to control cost. They have signed, they have came to an agreement with you for a time, a deadline, a scope, but they don't participate on the process. They just want their project delivered on time, on budget, and so on. So vendor, what they do, they try to get the client trust as soon as possible to lose less money possible and switch quickly to the time and materials model and the next contract. And I think this is the only reason why fixed price are still working nowadays, because everything is on vendor's shoulder, because the vendor is trying to make the client happy, so they are okay to sign the new contract on the new model. Okay, let's talk about the time and materials. A time and materials contract is an agreement where the buyer pays the service provider based on the actual time spent and the cost of materials used to complete the project, typically with hourly rates and material costs. Of course, you have flexibility. You can go wherever you want. It's like taking a taxi. When you ask the driver to drive you to one place, then to another, then probably to the previous place, then to another, and you are charging per kilometer. There are challenges, of course. Underperformance, so thinking on the project itself, because they are going forward. The good use of resources, deadlines, cost control, and scope prioritization. Tensions on client side. Client has budget limitations and an ideal scope in mind, which in the end is a masked fixed price contract. You will probably have faced that you are working at materials, and then after you have spent several iterations, then the client is asking why they have spent so much. The vendor has less incentive to control cost. You are paying me to go this place, then to the other. I'm charging you per kilometer. It seems there is no problem. but there is a problem. As a vendor, in this kind of contract, you are penalized by your performance, because the more skilled you are, the quicker you are able to provide a solution to the client, you will charge less, because probably your competence is taking 10 hours to do something, you only 2, and the competence is getting 5 times more than you are. You are not charging by value, you are charging per hour. So your capacity to grow is completely limited. It's called the early trap. So, second pillar of this session, which are the benefits of Agile contracts? The idea is to try to stop fighting to each other, to find a way that we have a win-win situation. So, while a contract is based on good services, offer, acceptance, consideration, and mutual obligations in a strict way, Agile contract, which is, of course, a contract, it's focused on flexible agreement tailored for projects using Agile methodologies. It's based on iterative delivery, collaboration, adapted to changes, continuous feedback, evolving requirements, delivering value, and so on. The difference, because most of you could think, okay, we are already working on Agile. So what's the difference? The difference is like the contract is taking that methodology into account. So everything regarding those specific points are clearly written on the contract. Okay, so which are the benefits? The client point of view, they get greater control and transparency, improved product quality, because you will have regular reviews, flexibility on change requirements and be able to adapt to market, faster time to market, because the idea is to deliver something that could be potentially deployed in production, cost management, and risk mitigation. On vendor side, we have flexibility in the scope and requirements, but also we have continuous client feedback, because he's involved, they are involved in the process. So we reduce the risk of rework, reduce the risk of scope creep, potential long-term relationship, because these kind of contracts, they are based on trust. And you are delivering value to the client, so they probably would like to continue with you. You have also the opportunity to get early payment compared to, for example, the fixed price contract, which normally you get a percentage at the beginning and the rest at the end. And of course, a better resource utilization, because you don't need to block a specific group of people to work in the project. As the contract says, you can be flexible with the new demands of the client and the requirements. So let's pull all together in the same direction, trying to find a solution. So we will explore different Agile contracts. Here, there's just 6 examples that we're going to see in detail, but please feel free to decide which of those fits better to your project and to your project phase. You are able to switch to one model to the other. You are able to cherry pick ideas for one contract to the other. If there's one specific thing that does not fit into your project, forget about it. I mean, these are just examples that you can use in order to get those new thing of contracts with your customers, or as a customer with your vendors. So the first one probably is the most easier, which is the time and materials, but with a cost selling. We previously saw that the client in the end has a budget limitation. So put that into the table. how much you can spend on this project. And once it's been decided, both client and vendor will work using that, that amount to get the highest value possible. I would like to, as an example, imagine that both are in the same car. With the money, you buy a tank of oil, you fill your car, and you would like to go as far as possible. But then the budget not in client or vendor shoulders. There's nothing to act with that. Like why you have spent so much is something that is managed from both. And it is the key, this kind of collaboration. So the key aspects of this kind of contract that needs to be written down, cost selling, of course. Scope flexibility, what is the impact of changing things, is not the same if you change something that you have already worked on rather than something that was slept in the backlog without any effort there. How's going to be the billing schedule, the time tracking? You need to be transparent with the client about if you are charging per hour in this model, the client needs to be aware of how much it's taking each action in their project. And any extra expensing approvals, like software licenses, troubles, whatever. Another model is the fixed price per sprint. This is quite similar to a normal fixed price project. The main difference is like the time is smaller. So because it probably is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks of development, you will be able to control better the scope. It's less probable that that scope changes. So you can come to an agreement with the client that those things are going to be delivered for a specific price. You will see that with model, we are breaking this hourly trap, because if you are able to deliver more value in less time, you are going to get the same amount. The key points that needs to be written down is the sprint scope needs to be clear. The scope boundaries, if it's possible to change something or not at all. Keep in mind that it's going to be a next sprint after this one. So you can decide that any extra effort, any feedback from the client that was not properly discussed will be part of the next sprint. And the good news about this is like the next sprint probably there will be other tasks, and the client could prioritize if what they have asked for is more important or not than what they had in mind. The acceptance criteria are key. I mean, as I said before, when you are signing full project, fixed price, you get like a document with maybe 50 pages, but no definition at all. In this model, the idea is to have full definition of everything before signing anything. So the acceptance criteria and so on needs to be properly clear. Sprint duration and, of course, the cost of the sprint. Another example. This is exactly the same as the previous one, but instead of working per sprint, you are working per phase. Which is a phase fully depends on the contract itself. The first phase could be the MVP. The first phase could be the integration with the e-commerce. The first phase could be anything. Same again. You are breaking, I mean, you have more detailed scope, and you are breaking that hourly trap. Because if you are able to deliver more value, you will get higher income. Things to take into account: the delivery phases, how it's going to be the change control process, how those phases are going to be approved, when that phase has ended, what needs to be achieved in order to say that that phase has been ended, founding milestones, and the cancellation terms. Graduated fixed price. Early completion results on higher hourly rates, while delays lead to lower rates, usually the cost per hour. So, ideally, you sign a contract with the client with as your normal price rate. But if the projects go longer than expected, because there were some estimations that were not accurate, I'm not talking about extra things that the client is adding. I'm talking about the original scope. Compared to the fixed price, the vendor will get no more money. In this model, the vendor at least will cover its costs. So both would like to finish the project earlier, because both, the client will need to pay more if the project gets delayed, and of course the vendor will get no profit of that second period, but at least it's not losing money. So we avoid this kind of workarounds, shortcuts, and so on that we discussed previously. Key contract aspects: scope limits, delivery deadlines, performance metrics, and which are the incentives and the penalties if you are going to deliver before or after. Fixed profit. The idea is like when you are negotiating the contract with the client, you are clear about how much you would like to get for this specific contract. It could be a fixed amount, it could be a percentage. So you need to be transparent with your cost. You need to calculate them first, of course. And be also transparent about your profit margin. So if the project takes longer or not, your profit is guaranteed. And you are sharing risk with the client. And this is the last example of all. You will see that some of them are pretty similar. There are several things in common. So you can, as I said before, you can cherry pick what you think is best for you. The idea is like client can make scope changes by removing comparable effort features. If the project ends early, remaining budget is split. This is awesome, but probably is the most difficult Agile contract to agree with a client. So both want to end the project as soon as possible. So the total budget needs to be clear since the beginning, and it needs to be clear what happened when the project ends. So it needs to be specifically clear which is the scope of the project, and you can decide with the client in that contract negotiation phase what will happen with the scope remaining. Typically, it's 50-50, but you can decide. So the earlier you finish, better for the client because it will spend less than the client expected at the beginning, and you will be rewarded with that part of the amount left. So, warning for everyone. These kind of contracts, the first time you see them, it's quite difficult to see they are possible or feasible. But once you see the possibilities of them and you are able to explain them either to your vendor, either to your client, there are lots of benefits. So be bold. Feel free to contact with the legal or finance department to solve any of their doubts. Be patient. It will take time to fully understand the possibilities. And of course, be transparent, because you will need to let them understand which are all the benefits of it and what's the reason. Basically, as I said before, the other models are not really working. So these are the takeaways of this session I would like you to bring back home. Clients and vendors share the same tensions. Different point of views, but they are the same. Cost control, overruns, deadlines, scope creep, the change management process, there is a gap between agile practices and the traditional contracts, fixed price and time and materials. And agile contracts are flexible and improve collaboration and trust by managing scope changes, cost, and expectations transparently. What questions do you have? I think there is a mic.
Hello, thank you so much for the speech, it's great. I have a question. In the same way that Agile methodology appears, some developers didn't want to jump to the Agile methodology because it was different. They thought that they cannot control the projects and similar. How to sell an Agile contract with our clients? Because as you explained, an Agile contract is the better way, but I think that maybe the client can think or can have the feeling that we want to take more money from the project. So that's the question: how to sell this kind of contract to our clients?
Okay, good question. The first thing I think is like we are making that problem worse because I have said before on fixed price contracts when we should all vendors be strict also with the initial scope, we are flexible. So the client sees no difference. Like I signed with you a fixed price contract, but I'm changing you everything. Are you telling me that everything is okay? Why moving to time materials with cost selling mode if it's going to be exactly the same as we have done before, but also have this clear contract that I can pressure you to finish everything into detail, even if you have iterate into the first topic 3 months. So I think that clients see no difference because we are, as a vendor, sometimes losing lots of money. So I think probably the first way is to be strict on fixed price contracts. I think that as a vendor, it's pretty easy to fulfill the initial contract because sometimes it's quite vague, sometimes it does not include everything that it should. And when they start suffering, probably they will see the benefit. I think that with clients that you are already working with them and they have seen how you work and also all your ideas and so on, it will be easier to move to this kind of contract.
Have you been, well, first of all, thank you for your speech. I liked a lot. Have you been able to use an agile contract with a client that you didn't know before?
Yes. Okay, so one thing that we used to do, it's difficult, okay, but is even if we are working on a fixed price contract because we have won an RFP for a client, in the first meeting that we had with them, we tried to let them understand that please forget about the initial scope because for sure it will change. Let's transform the amount that we have signed for the specific contract into hours, and we transform that contract into a time and materials with capped limits. So that way, imagine that we have signed a contract for a specific amount, and then we tell the client, okay, we can follow strictly this contract, or think this is a 1,000 hours contract. These are the top priorities, and we will iterate over them. And not all the times, but I don't know, maybe most of the times, the client agrees. Because we should take into account the tensions that the client, the person who needed to write down the RFP, has everything on their shoulders. Like everything that a person forget about is going to be an extra cost. So it's not ideal for them at all. So when you let them see that, for example, in the first meetings, when you are talking with them, it probably happened to you that there someone says something, and because of course you will need to know the scope by heart, this like, no, this was not in the contract at all. And then everyone freaks out. And this is the moment to say, why don't we change this model to this one and just to work?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. One of the reasons we sometimes prefer time and material over an agile contract is that it's about estimates, because somehow it's a way to be safe, because it's sometimes very difficult for the customer to estimate or to accept the estimations that we do for some project. So do you have any recommendation about that?
Okay, so about how estimate. Okay, estimation, as you all know, are really, really difficult. The first sprints of the project are even more difficult because you get nothing about the project, you know nothing about the project itself. You will learn across the process. So that's why, for example, working per sprint in this kind of agile contract, probably in the first sprint you will lose money, maybe, but you will learn a lot in order to move to the next one. And also, another option when you work with time and materials, with the capped budget and the client, and you are being transparent with the client, they will see what's happening behind the curtains regarding, because in Drupal specifically, because people used to think that there is always a module for that, and sometimes it is, most of the time it is, you still need to integrate that into the business logic. So estimations are difficult. What I suggest is to try to detail the client, which are all the processes involved in one specific task. Sometimes moving a button in the top right corner, it's a nightmare because the template they have chosen does not allow that. But you can probably suggest an alternative. So I think that estimation is just a big concept where you need to define everything, teach the client some way, and also provide alternatives. Because scope, this is one of the scope of the keys of agile contracts, like the scope needs to be flexible. And that's something where Drupal it's really awesome, because it will be really easy to get like 80% of the needs of the client, and this is the other 20%, which is very difficult and not a Pareto principle. Long answer, sorry. Any other question? Okay, so thank you so much for coming. Join the contribution opportunities, and if you like it, please add a review.